Morning.
Morning, Mr. Commissioner,
Yes.
members.
Yes, Mr. Lever, do
Good
you...
morning, Mr. Commissioner. The witness will continue. If you can just perhaps warn him that he is still under oath to
Yes.
speak to him.
What's his name again? Mr. Shield. Mr. Shield. You're still under oath. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, I forgot to mention yesterday that Mr. Schill is one of these exceptional persons who's been in the employ of the PIC for the past 9 years.
I thought he says he was the longest serving.
In his department, yes. Mr. Schill, I want you to deal with the topic that you mentioned as HR-related matters, the employee perspective in your statement. And you will realize that we had evidence before the Commission on these issues that you're raising in your statement. Will you just then briefly deal with your own personal experience and perceptions of these issues?
Thank you, sir. I think it's important to state that this is very much from my own experience over the time and as a perspective as an employee for the last 8 going on 9 years. So the PIC culture of HR or related to HR has become one of threat and fear, as many of my colleagues have alluded to. In the respect of fear, we see the executives often preach a story of fail safely, but the reality is that no one will really do anything until you fall out of favor. And the issue of falling out of favor is that there's no warning of this. It can be big or small, and the effect is that everyone tries to do what they believe is necessary to keep the executive happy, because behind closed doors they wield the power and the sword.
Can you just give me a moment? Can I get somebody who will attend to the air conditioning, please?
It's too hot.
It's hot up here.
It's too hot here.
In other words, you need to stay below the radar, and if not, the proverbial kitchen sink will be thrown at you, as is the case with most general employees, by the internal legal counsel, Ms. Pamela Parler, who will do whatever it takes in evidence, and I will bring evidence to this later, and you will be purged at whatever the cost, even if it means the company has to pay a CCMA settlement or otherwise, but to come back from a proverbial culling simply does not happen. No matter the level, whether the lowest ranked staff member or executive, the message is clear: toe the line, or else the best you can hope for is a CCMA settlement. In terms of threat, the threat of one's bonus being on the line is an ever-present and real risk, and there's a most effective tool in managing compliance. The sword that is always above your head is ready to fall at any time, as it were. In an environment where many of us are paid below a market-related cost to company, for most the bonus represents the justification to stay at PIC, as it brings one closer to market. So for the most part, the PIC bonus is not simply a bonus, but a vital part of income, because after all, we all have families and loved ones that look to us for financial support. And though mentioned in hushed tones, given the secrecy that shrouds bonuses, as previously mentioned, the unofficial understanding of staff is the one who falls into disfavor with management will feel it severely in the pocket come bonus time, irrespective of real performance. And heaven forbid that the one who's in disfavor is a department head, because then the whole department may suffer the same fate. This was the case, to my knowledge, in the IT department 2 years back. Comments like, be sure to add that to your BSc when perceived issues arise, only reinforce the idea that what you have contracted on earlier in the year is irrelevant, and at any time the goalposts can be shifted. This is a favorite line of the executive and many EXCO members. To staff, this is simply a very poorly veiled threat. For long-serving members like myself, the BSc process is somewhat of a joke. And the reality is, irrespective of what you have contracted, the score that you will get after the moderation committee will be whatever management decides. Though officially there is a mechanism to appeal, experience has taught, and I've tested it myself, that at best your score will remain the same. For some, questioning the executive has led to a lower score. So the message, in other words, is clear. Accept the score given or risk being made an example of. The process as a whole is simply viewed as a tick-a-box exercise. In most years gone by, contracting for the year is only concluded in August or September, which is already halfway through that respective year. The last 2 quarterly reviews, as indicated earlier, are simply done by staff scoring themselves with very little, and in most cases, no feedback from management. While final scoring differs little from the interim scoring, this would remain the case unless you felt that you scored above average, which in most cases for general staff is not accepted as a general rule. It is commonplace then for management and the company to score well above the general staff, which begs the question of how it's possible that the management and the company can do so well with so many average employees. Moderation, as done by EXCO, is simple. Anyone who is not in favor for real or perceived reasons is dealt with. Anyone who has a high score best have towed the line, or your score will simply be cut back to the mysterious bell curve, which HR constantly refers to. And this would also then obviously mean that your executive head would also have to be seen as compliant, otherwise you would automatically suffer on the scoring. Between April and June, tongue-in-cheek, is the friendliest time to work at PIC, because even the slightest issue or incident could have a direct financial consequence with the year end considered after April. From an HR perspective, most would attest that to the friendliness and helpfulness of the business partners who service the various divisions. The general view, though, is that this is sadly where it stops. HR staff toe the line, or else, as I've mentioned, there's mechanisms to deal with people who don't. With many experienced and senior HR staff members having left in the past few years, the message is clear: one toes the line or one leaves. When it comes to policies and gradings, these are routinely and unilaterally changed. If you consider grading, for example, in my case, my position was downgraded in terms of the scales so that I was excluded from the LTI pool, despite having 8 years service and previously qualifying. This was subsequent to one of the benchmarking exercises, as mentioned earlier, done by HR. In my case, the benchmarking, considering other companies, was based on a sample of just 2 companies. Both companies do not prioritize my position within the structure, and so on that basis I was downgraded. Along with the grading, policy is also changed. Along the lines of the LTI, or long-term incentive, this was changed with immediate effect. Effectively, I view it in my case as a demotion, as it's a benefit that I'm no longer able to enjoy. This was done with absolutely no regard to staff in terms of the effect it has on them. Further, it is in my view without support in terms of fair labor practice, in that it is done unilaterally. For example, a change that happened in the policy was the policy on long-term incentives broadly used to state to qualify for a long-term incentive, a staff needed to be on a certain grade and achieve a score average of 3.5. If achieved, you would earn the LTI in this year, But in terms of it being a retention strategy, you would only get your payout after 3 years of having maintained the 3.5 average. The policy, however, was changed to accommodate the new grading, while at the same time the wording was changed to say that you now need to score a minimum of 3.5 for all 3 years. It also came into effect immediately. So rather than affecting my LTI for 3 years from now, I lost the 2 years previous LTIs, which in my view I should have qualified for prior to the change at minimum. For me, this is significant because it relates to between 20 and 25% of my annual income that is immediately removed. I personally raised this issue with the head of HR, Mr. Chris Polwane, who effectively told me that that is the way it is and that should you wish to challenge it, you can raise a grievance, or in other words, you can complain to the people who did not care when they changed the policy in the first place. For the most part, staff don't raise issues with HR, as experience has taught that rather than being viewed for what it is effectively pinning a target on one's own back. No one I know at HR, or rather at PIC, believes the head of HR has the staff interests front and center. Rather, he is seen as an enforcer, as it is through his department that disciplinaries are brought. This, in my view, is based on the fact that when he started at PIC, he seemed to make all the right noises. But when the annual report was published in the following year, he earned a bonus less than many staff. The message was then clear. He needed to change his view to comply, and in my view, he now fully complies. And it is on this basis that he effectively shut down my objection regarding the regrading. Further to the above, last year when bonuses were delayed, it was the general staff's view that we were being held ransom by the executive management's submission to Treasury for approval of their own bonuses. That is, staff bonuses are approved at a REMCO or board committee level, whereas executive bonuses are approved at a Treasury level. But given that the numbers of executives may need to be reworked, given Treasury feedback, all bonuses were held back. And this is rumored to have happened in the previous year, where executives' bonuses were shifted between LTI and STI to make it acceptable to Treasury. Our suspicions that our bonuses were held back were confirmed by the board chairman. Given the lack of clear and honest communication from an HR perspective, we will never know. The question in itself has led to an increased level of distrust in the board and executive management as a whole. Ultimately, it is this distrust and lack of transparency that has led many staff into joining a union in an attempt to unionize the PIC and force management and the board to communicate openly and honestly.
Question? I just wanted to check. Are you saying that those bonuses should be treated differently and maybe paid at different times? You know, the executives versus the staff?
Through you, Commissioner, it's our understanding as staff that the bonus pool for staff is approved at a board subcommittee level. And as such, once that's approved, it's our understanding that those bonuses are immediately payable. The Treasury approves the executive bonus pool, which has to do with the company score, etc. So it's effectively, as we understand, two separate processes, and that was confirmed to us by the chairman last year, but we're not exactly 100% sure of that.
Just another one is that, are you also saying that there could be a problem where sort of the executive heads' bonuses, the staff bonuses are taken away by the executive heads? Is that possible?
I can't comment on that specifically because I don't know the details, but it's our understanding that how bonuses are calculated, the calculation is the matter that is held back, because then monies are shifted between LTI and STI depending on how the feedback they get from Treasury. So I'm not saying that I believe money is taken from staff, but it's held back in order to be able to potentially recalculate the split to suit the executives.
Depending on what the Treasury says and all that. Okay.
Just to clarify as well, is there one bonus pool irrespective of whether it's executive or staff that all of the funding for bonuses comes out of, or is there an executive pool and a staff pool?
Ma'am, this is one of the things that we as staff are not 100% clear on in terms of the communication. I would imagine there are two pools of sorts, or because obviously Treasury approves the senior or the executive level of bonuses, but this is one of those things that we as staff are not aware of.
Can we get clarity on that? Thanks.
We will do that, Mr. Commissioner.
Whistleblowing. Though much fanfare was made about the whistleblowers hotline, including emails and randomly placed signs, I don't believe anyone at PIC trusted it. There are a number of reasons for this. There are little to no significant audit findings. Despite many knowing of questionable deals and breaches of policy, audit never seemed to flag significant issues. In terms of the Auditor General, the auditors were similarly seemed to never find significant problems, and it was rather a well-known fact that auditors from the Auditor General's office were treated with contempt and in most cases, as it were, sent packing in no uncertain terms. And this, whether was perceived or not, this is the feeling of staff, that we will give them information and they have to accept it as that, and end of story. So staff do question their ability to act independently. From a board level, over the years, issues like AO, as is before this commission, was sent back for ratification, where as the reality is there appears to be significant policy and controls breaches. In other words, the action taken by board will effectively fix a mistake, as it were, effectively neutralizing a whistleblower. In other words, the board was seen to cover for its mistakes that could amount to billions with a simple fix like a ratification, while staff were fired or taken to disciplinary for minor policy infractions where little or no actual damages were suffered by the company. Further to this, there's also the perception of the witch hunts as previously discussed, and I won't go into detail, but given the actions in the past where those that are accused seem to go after those that provided information, it just proved to staff that rather than being an open and transparent independent investigation, those fingered through such accusations would personally search for the evidence. The message was therefore clear: you whistleblow at your own peril. Further to this, the actions of board and management from a staff perspective is what we see unfolding before this very commission. The AO transaction which has been flagged is, rather than have all suspended, the board saw fit to suspend the compiler, Victor, as the lowest ranking staff member involved in the transaction, and as well as the head of department who was out of the country at the time. But given that the general view of suspensions is that an accused is suspended when they might interfere with an investigation or intimidate witnesses, the question is, how can it be justified that he, Victor, because he seemed uncooperative according to audit, was to be suspended, while those who approved and actioned the deal are for the most part left to carry on business as usual at PIC. As we sit here, there are rumors that individuals who have been called to give evidence before the evidence leader, Advocate Libber, are then summoned to account for this on the 7th floor. Whether real or not, the rumor in itself is intimidating for most.
Sorry, can I ask you, Advocate Libba, are you aware of any of this? And having heard about this, have you checked on any aspect of this with the PIC?
Mr. Commissioner, it has been reported to me, and we're busy following it up. And you would have noticed that with the witnesses coming now to the Commission, they are asked before they start testifying whether it is their own statement, whether the evidence leader has persuaded or asked them to put anything in the statement or take out of the statement. And that is because at the board meeting last week, the board were informed that the evidence leaders ask potential witnesses to bring their statements in the Word format so that the evidence leaders can chop and change and tweet these statements for the Commission. And we're also busy following that up, which is factually not correct. I have a stronger word for that, but it's factually not correct. Mr. Shield, before you conclude, I missed something yesterday, and that is to ask you, these amendments to the contract that you testified, could you find any proof that it was authorized?
No, there was no proof of the amendments to that contract in terms of the original offer to the rental agreement.
Then, if we're going back there, Advocate, I'd like to just ask that the question and the costs implication of changing the company that was doing the fitting, what that company is, who the directors of that company is, was there a tender process for that, and did PIC have to pay the company that had been contracted, that was terminated for the contract that was in place, even though they were terminated? Was there costs involved in meeting obligations there? Because obviously they would have done some work and been committed. So there were two elements of cost: the company in the termination and the company being employed, and whether there was a tender process and the name of that company.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We are already in the process of following that up. And there's one aspect I forgot. Yes, Mr. Schiff, can you just tell the Commission about your own discipline?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Commissioner. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm personally involved in a disciplinary which commenced on the 15th of January. And this process, in my view, is similar to those of others, is without merit and a clear example of the victimization that is rife at PIC. Though there was an appointment made without requisite approval in terms of the delegation of authority and procurement policy on one of my projects, it was in fact not made by myself, but rather my manager, the National Development Manager, and signed off by the Executive Head of Properties, after I refused to make the appointment without the needed approval being in place. And on Monday, I was actually found guilty of 2 charges related to this disciplinary. And the sanction in terms of the policy for these 2 charges is dismissal. And I believe that it will likely lead to my dismissal later in this month. Okay.
That is the evidence, Mr. Commissioner.
Just a question. The AG, the Auditor General, you are saying that there were most times like sand picking. Can you expand further, because that could be a worrying thing, you know, given that we read the annual reports and all that, and we generally think they should be right.
So my experience,
something maybe we might want to follow up, just, you know, to ensure that it's done properly, if it's not done properly.
Through you, Commissioner, yes, my experience in this matter directly is limited. But what I can say, for example, is in relation to the fruitless and wasteful expenditure to which my evidence relates. There was no finding in relation to this, despite this amount being at least probably 17 million rand, which begs the question why it was not flagged. It's my understanding that there were some questions around it, but reasons were provided to the Auditor General, and they were forced to accept these reasons on whatever basis, whereas the evidence does not necessarily support that finding.
So we should follow it up, Advocate Luba.
We'll do that, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Commissioner, the next witness is ready. Can I just ask for a brief adjournment? 5 minutes will do.
Yes. Mr. Shield, there might be paragraphs or subparagraphs that you jumped and didn't read into the record. Do you confirm the correctness of those parts of your statements?
Yes, Chair. My statement is signed, and I confirm that all of that information is correct.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for availing yourself to come and give evidence here. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
We'll adjourn until you call us. Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, we are ready to proceed. The next witness is Mr. Martinez Philippus de Jonge, and he's ready to take the oath. Staan net op.
Good morning, Mr. De Jonge.
Morning, Commissioner.
Your full names are, as mentioned by
That's correct,
Advocate
Commissioner.
Liver, Martinez Philippus de Jonge.
That's correct.
Have you got any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No,
No
Commissioner.
objection. Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. de Jonge, just for the record, is it correct that you are here under a formal witness subpoena?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Why?
Because I just make sure that I'm covered when I testify in the hearing.
In fact, is it correct that you requested a subpoena before coming to the Commission?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Will you then please state for the record who you are, your qualifications, 1, 2, 3 of your statement?
Thank you, Commissioner. I, Martinez Philippus de Jonge, declare herewith as follows. I'm an adult male with identity number 640218515308 residing at 338 Angela Street, Ferry Glen, Pretoria, with contact number 082-768-9303. My work address is the Public Investment Corporation, Minden Main Centre, Waterkloof, with contact number 012-742-3546. The following is a summary of my tertiary qualifications. University of Northwest, B Accounting. University of Pretoria, BCom Honours Accounting. UNISA, Certificate in the Theory of Accounting. And I wrote the board exams in 1993 to become a chartered accountant. I attended the University of Pretoria, the IPSA Diploma in Solvency Law in 1999, and I done my master's degree through Pretoria in 2002. In 2015, I wrote the Financial Services Board exams, FIS 1 and FIS 5. The following is a synopsis of my previous employment until 1 November 2008, the date I joined the Public Investment Corporation. 85 to 88, I done my articles at Trondetoy, they currently PwC. 89 to 90, I served at the South African Defence Force, compulsory military service. 91 to 95 at ISCO Pension Fund. I started as an accountant with the following duties: budget control, systems control and development, monthly management reports, taxation and VAT returns, and investment administration. I was later promoted to chief accountant with the following added responsibilities: supervisor of personnel, treasury function, foreign currency transactions, reserve bank approvals, monthly development reports, and then preparation of the financial annual statements. In 96 to 99, I joined Boland Bank, who later became BO Bank and then was bought out by Nedbank. I was appointed as the regional credit risk manager for the northern regions, with my main responsibilities: supervision over personnel and risk management at 14 branches, management and control over the region's active finance book, evaluation of client risk and formulation of risk profiles for each client, and financial analysis of client financial statements when they apply for funding. 2001 to 2008, I joined University of South Africa as a lecturer, where I lectured financial accounting for the honours and CTA students. Simultaneously, 2000 and 2008, I had a contract appointment with the Land Bank, where I conducted all their forensic and fraud investigations for them. And then on 1st of November 2008, I joined the Public Investment Corporation as Senior Project Manager, Due Diligence, reporting to the head of Isabaya, and later changed to the Senior Manager, Quality Assurance, Due Diligence, reporting to the directly to the CEO, Dr. Dan Machele.
Can you just, again, refreshing our memories, Isabaya, what exactly is that?
Isabaya is effectively the PIC's unlisted leg. It's between development finance and then private equity.
Thank you. Can you proceed with 5?
My main duties included the development of a due diligence manual for unlisted investments to be used as a guide during the execution of the due diligence. I can refer you to Annex A if you want me to take you through, Commissioner.
No, you can
Is
proceed.
it fine? In addition to managing the process, I had to oversee execution of the due diligences, interact with external due diligence service providers, and sign off on due diligences to ensure compliance with the due diligence manual.
Can I just again stop you here? I should have asked you in the beginning. We might not deal with 1 or 2 paragraphs in your statement. Do you confirm that that is your complete statement and you confirm the correctness of what is stated in that statement?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Thank you. You can then proceed.
In November 2008, the Executive Head Development Investments, Roy Rajar, called me in.
No, it's 2013.
Sorry. In addition to managing the process, I had to oversee the execution of due diligences, interact with external due diligence service providers, and sign off on due diligences to ensure compliance with the due diligence manual.
Can I ask you, it seems to me what you're stating there, you were in charge of the due diligence process.
Overseeing it and make sure that it's quality due diligences, yeah. But the duty normally executed the work themselves.
Question? Yeah, question.
Sorry, Commissioner.
Did you have a team reporting to you? I mean, is that a big department?
No, it was only me. When they appointed me initially, the idea was that I would create a department looking at the due diligences, but that never happened. So it was only me reporting initially to the head of Isabaya and then to Dr. Dan directly.
But as I understand, when you got there, you drafted this manual.
That's correct. It also went to the Executive Committee for approval and was approved as the manual for due diligence processes. And actually, that's correct, Commissioner. That's just the index, but the full manual is much thicker, but that's just the index of the manual.
Mr. Commissioner, would you like the witness to briefly take you through that, Annex A?
I would actually prefer that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, just the due diligence, the purpose of the policy. The purpose of the document is to explain the role of the due diligence and to set a framework whereby the process can be governed and managed. Definition of the due diligence. The due diligence is the process of reviewing the processes, methodologies, assumptions, calculations, and the statutory information used in the preparation of financial and non-financial information accompanying an investment proposal to obtain reasonable assurance that information is fair, factual, correct, and relevant, and in order to assess the investment risk relating to an investment. Areas of performance, key performance areas for the department or the due diligence process. The key function of the due diligence unit is to develop the necessary systems and procedures to guide, assist, oversee, and assess the due diligence process for Isabaya. The actual execution and reporting on individual due diligences will be the responsibility of the project managers or portfolio managers. Commissioner, I just mentioned the structure and the job descriptions changed since then. The portfolio project managers is now fund principal, so there's a change currently at PIC. Auxiliary performance areas. In addition to the key performance areas, the due diligence unit will also be responsible for the following areas: liaison with the external due diligence service providers, keep abreast of development in due diligence methodologies and financial modeling, training of Isabaya employees regarding due diligence policies, processes, and related practices to ensure that all material risks associated with an investment are addressed and mitigated. Preparation and management of the due diligence budget. If you look at the diagram for due diligence, you receive an instruction from the project manager, now it will be the fund principal, receive an activity sheet, receive a draft scope, clarify the scope of the timelines, that's the actions that you have to take. Then the next step, assess the scope of the due diligence and identify the need for external experts. The normal actions would consult with the project manager, identify the performance areas, decide on the level of outsourcing, finalize the scope indicated, work to be done in-house and externally. Submit to the Isabaya committee. At that stage, it was our first committee. Conduct an in-house due diligence. We refer to section 5 of the document. Prepare documents for the investment committee. and then submit investment committee for approval, prepare a scope and request for approval for appointment of external service providers, appoint external experts for delegation of authority and agree on the deliverables, assessing the feedback from the external service providers, and then submit the report to the investment committee for approval. The high-level specifications for the in-house due diligence. Now the sections, I don't have the sections here. It's just
You don't have to go through the,
Okay.
to the whole document.
okay.
Can I just ask, the PMC doesn't come into play here. I see you refer
Yes, the
things to
PMC, that's the new
investment committee.
structures. Yeah, the new structures. So that replaced almost in the Isabaya committee. The PMC 1 is now the new replacement for, actually it goes back to the dual screening committee now. But I must also just comment, this was updated in 2012.
No, wait.
Sorry.
Don't you have a PMC unlisted?
Yeah. Can I just, this process was developed in 2012. Then you'll see later in my affidavit, I was removed to the dealing team. So since then, I didn't work on the process anymore. But this is the process that I developed and implemented at that stage when I was still the head of due diligence.
I think you can go back to your affidavit now.
5.1, conducted due diligence planning by completing and the due
Can I-
diligence. Sorry.
You can go back to your affidavit now.
Okay, sorry, sir.
I think you must start at paragraph 6 now. The point is, you were employed by the PIC to develop this manual. You did that. It was implemented. And then in November 2013, you were called in by the Executive Head Development Investments. Can you continue from there?
That's correct, Commissioner. In November 2013, the Executive Head Development Investments, Roy Rajar, called me for a meeting in his office. At the meeting, he informed me that the CEO doesn't want me in the position of Senior Manager Quality Assurance Due Diligence anymore, and that I will be transferred to the dual team as an Associate Principal, Social Infrastructure, reporting to the Fund Principal, Social Infrastructure. When requesting the reason for my transfer...
Sorry, what did that amount to? Was it demotion, or was it a sort of a bigger or more important position that you are now moved to?
No, it was a straight over moved. I experienced it actually demotion because initially I reported to the CEO and I report to a Fund Principal. But financially, no implication.
But in terms of the competencies that you were exercising in due diligence and the competencies you were exercising in this new social infrastructure, which was the better use of your skill?
Because my background is forensic investigation, my preference was actually the due diligence side. So I would have preferred to stay as the head of the diligence.
But you have moved from there.
That's right.
You testified that you, till that day, reported to the CEO of the PIC. Did he tell you, or did he advance any reasons why he didn't want you in that position anymore?
No, I just spoke to Roy Rajar, who indicated to me that was instruction from the CEO that I should be moved to social infrastructure.
You did ask him for the reason. What was his response?
Well, when I requested reasons for my transfer, he indicated that was instruction from the CEO and that I am free to dispute it, but a male at my age don't have much of a choice. Yes. And that's true.
Now, you go to paragraph 7.
Just a quick one, On the 7th floor of the pier, who's on the 7th floor? Because I've heard a lot about the 7th floor.
To my knowledge, it's only the CEO and the CFO, but I can't
The whole floor.
the 7th floor. Yeah.
And the heads, where do they sit?
They're sitting with the departments.
What floors? Oh,
Our
okay,
department, Roy, sat with social on the 6th floor with us. So they sat, my understanding, with the departments. Yeah.
We might need to just visit and get the layout and all that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In January 2014, I assumed my duties as Associate Principal, Social Infrastructure, focusing on sourcing, assessing, and presenting of transactions to the investment committees. Okay. All right, sorry. Okay. At the beginning of February 2016, I received a call from the CEO for a meeting in his office. He requested that I conduct a forensic audit on the preparations of AFCRI Poultry Pty Limited, trading as Daybreak Farms. After the meeting, I drafted a request for proposal to be sent out to the prospective service providers to conduct the post-investment due diligence on Daybreak Farms. The proposals received were vetted, and it was recommended that Ernst & Young and Deloitte be appointed to conduct the post-investment due diligence for us, refer Annex B for the approval of the appointment of the two service providers.
Can I just interrupt again? And I apologize for doing that. Till this meeting with the CEO in February 2016, was there anything you had to do with this entity, Daybreak Farms? Any knowledge of that?
No, I wasn't part of the deal team that worked on AFCRI Poultry. After completion of their respective assessments, the both service providers provided us with their reports or findings, and the copies of these reports were forwarded to the CEO and the Executive Head Development Investments on the 14th of April 2016 for their perusal.
Mr. Commissioner, copies of these reports have been made available to the Commission. There is a clause in both reports restricting this report being made public to third parties, and for that reason it is not part of the official statement of the witness, but it is material before the Commission, which I'm entitled to place before the Commission in terms of the proclamation.
Thank you, Commissioner. At a board meeting of Daybreak Farms held on 26 April 2016, a resolution was taken to remove the CEO, Kolofelo Maponya, as CEO, and also to appoint an agricultural advisory business into Africa Solution Services Pty Limited, trading as AfriLogic, with the assistance of a Mike Kingston expert in the poultry industry to assess the current status of and propose a turnaround strategy for Daybreak Farms.
Again, if I can interrupt you there, this entity, Daybreak Farms, is a matter that is under investigation by this Commission and by the forensic team of this Commission. And from the results of this investigation thus far, it appears that approximately after 6 months of making this investment, this entity went belly up. Is that also according to your information?
That's correct, Commissioner.
And you refer to Annex E, and it refers to this board meeting of the Board of Directors of the company held on the 26th of April. And from the list of directors, it would appear that the two directors on this board representing the PIC were Mr. Raja, head of unlisted, and Mr. Magula, head of risk. Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner.
And I'm just asking you, I don't know if you can comment, but the assessment of this investment and approval of this investment would have it been within the department of Mr. Raja as the head of unlisted.
That's correct.
Thank you. Carry on.
Yeah, question. I don't know whether you sort of talk further about it, but I just wanted to get, when you say the company went belly up, like, what do we mean?
It's practically insolvent, Mr. Commissioner.
Insolvent?
Yes.
Ooh.
To secure its interests, the PIC, as the biggest stakeholder of Daybreak Farms, decided to second myself to Daybreak Farms as the interim CEO on 13 May 2016. My responsibilities were to take over the function of the CEO, overseeing AfriLogic to ensure that they deliver on their mandate, and to report back to the PIC on a regular basis.
Just to assist the Commission, because of the dire financial situation of this Daybreak Farms, an expert entity, AfriLogic, was contracted to assist in the turnaround process. Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner.
And part of your duties as the acting CEO was to oversee that this expert assistance be properly executed.
That's correct, Commissioner. As I was involved in the due diligence of PIC's transaction with AFRI Group, now I don't know if I should explain just the structure. Sorry,
Yeah,
sir.
just a question, Jonge. Do you know whether a DD was done before the PIC put money in
Yes,
Daybreak?
there was external due diligence, there was financial modeling, and there was also valuations done, initial, before the transaction. Yeah.
Which might mean then they were not correct or something?
Unfortunately, I wasn't part of
Oh,
the
you're
team,
not
so I
part.
can't comment on that.
Mr. Commissioner, you will have evidence on that score. The evidence will be, and I will later deal with this aspect in his evidence, that it was an overvaluation of this entity. Evidence will be presented that the realistic value of this entity at the time was between 600 and 800 million, and the investment by PIC amounted to 1.2 billion.
Commissioner, if I may, let me just explain the structure of AFRI and AFRI Poultry. If I can take you to Annexure I-13, please.
The memo on business cycles?
That's correct.
That's correct, yes. Thank you, Commissioner. Just the AFRI Group is the big AFRI Group. They've got had two investments, AFRI Poultry Pty Limited and Kinross Feed Mill. And part of the transaction that PIC became involved in, Kinross was sold, the assets of Kinross was sold to AFRI Poultry. And then AFPRO and PIC bought the shares in AFRI Poultry from AFRI Group. So if I refer to AFRI, that's actually the AFRI Group, and if I refer to Daybreak, I refer to AFRI Poultry.
In other words, AFRI Poultry became Daybreak.
That's right.
This is the left-hand side of the diagram.
Sorry, yeah, no, I didn't put it on here. I'll just take you through what is Daybreak's structure. So just to explain this, the initial structure, AFRI is the initial shareholder. They sold Kinross to AFRI Poultry, and then PIC with AFRO bought in the shares in AFRI Poultry and became Daybreak Farms. Just to explain
What is MMI?
that's Maponya Group, the group of Kolofele Maponya. Just to explain the workflow of AFRI Poultry, first you sit with the eggs, that's the parent group normally, that they lay the eggs, then the eggs go to the hatchery. Now, Daybreak had two sections. They got contract grower, broilers, and then their own farms. Then after the eggs were hatched, you will go to the broilers, where they grow the broilers, and then we'll go to the abattoir, and then go to the storage, and then it was sold. And then they also had in the feedlot that actually provide both sides with the feed, the feed mill that provided the feed to the group.
So it's a sort of egg division or egg area, and then there's the chicken area.
Yeah, it's almost because of the, what do you call it, sensitivity of the type of agriculture, you have to keep them separate. So you sit with the egg side, the parents, that's separate, then you sit with the hatchery, separate, and then you sit with the broilers where they grow the chicken, and then you sit with the apple. So there's a reason why it's so far apart from that. The positive point of Daybreak is they own the own chain, from the feed mill up to the final product. If I can go, Commissioner, if I can go back to paragraph 12. As I was involved in the due diligence of PIC, at that stage I was still part of the due diligence, head of due diligence at that stage. The transaction with AFCRI Group, now that was a separate transaction where PIC bought a stake into AFCRI Group, so that's a total different transaction. I recall there was the condition set by the PIC Fund Investment Panel on 30 January 2014 that the poultry division, at that stage AFCRI Poultry, now Daybreak Farms, be sold within 12 to 18 months because of its underperformance against other divisions in the AFCRI Group. Sorry for that typo.
I just want the Commission to underline this, what is stated in this paragraph. It's a condition precedent with the deal of AFCRI that they must sell off Daybreak Farms because of underperformance. And the witness previously stated that is exactly the entity they then invested in 2015.
Just to check, isn't it that many companies listed on the JSE did sell their chicken businesses out and all that?
I can't really comment.
You can't comment on
according to me, most of them prefer the full chain because the problem, your biggest contribution cost is your feed. So if you don't control the input, you don't make money because the margins are very small for chicken. So you have to control the whole. If you look at Astral, you look at Rainbow, they all control the whole chain down from the beginning to the end.
Yeah. And the PIC, was the PIC a big shareholder in AFCRI?
Not a big shareholder, but a shareholder in AFCRI.
Yeah. And then they spun out the Daybreak separately and put money there.
That's right. I'll get to my statement the next.
All right.
Thank you, Commissioner. At paragraph 13, the PIC was approached by Motopu Ponya Investments, that's MMI, who's also the shareholder, a Part B shareholder in AFCRI Group, presented by Kolofelo Moponya to acquire Daybreak Farms from AFCRI. The PIC, through its private equity, private sector and small and medium enterprise investment panel, passed a resolution on 2nd of April 2015 to do the following investment into Daybreak Farms. Firstly, they bought the equity at nominal value. PIC, on behalf of GPF, UIF and CC, took up a 6% stake at 36 Rand. AFPRO, MMI Lead B Group, take up 54% at 55 Rand, and then the management took up 10% at 10 Rand. So that gives the total equity of 100. So take out the equity from AFCRI Group.
Just confirming the amount, 54 shares. You said 55. Is it 55 or 54?
Sorry, 54,
54.
Commissioner, 54. It's 36, 54, and 10. Thank you. Then, as part of the balance sheet, part of the transaction was to actually take over the debt that was on the balance sheet at that stage. Now, the debentures issued by Daybreak Farms, PIC, on behalf of GPF, UIF, and CC, took up 892 million rand. Further instruments issued, there's a senior debt to Daybreak Farms, PIC, on behalf of GPF, UIF, and CC, take up 299,790,000, so 299,790,000 rand. The proceeds on the debt funding was mainly utilized to settle current debt on the balance sheet. AFPRO, the MMI-led company, contributed 10 million through a preference share issued by the Daybreak Farms. MMI is also part of Bafep Agri Pty Limited, who is the BE party in AFCRI Group that I referred to in point 12. PIC also had exposure to Kolofelo Moponya or his intermediary companies through SA Home Loans and Resurrect Fund Managers, which may lead to overexposure to one individual or company.
Do you perhaps know what is the exposure of PIC to SA Home Loans and Razorite?
Unfortunately, I wasn't part of that transaction. I can't really commit on the amount that was invested.
Mr. Commissioner, these two entities, SA Home Loans and Razorite Fund Managers, are also part of the transactions presently investigated by the forensic team. and evidence will be presented on the exposure of PIC and the shareholders of these entities.
Can I just confirm the second last line of that paragraph on page 5, where you speak of SA Home Loans and Resorite Fund Managers, which may led, do you mean which may have led but possibly didn't lead to exposure? I'm not sure what is meant
Yeah,
there.
PIC funded Kolofelo or his intermediate companies to buy stake into SA Home Loans and Resorite Fund Managers. So PIC was the funder for the transaction.
And was PIC exposed to, you say which may led, or is it may have led?
It may be, because you have to look, when you do investment, you have to look at your total exposure to one person, that you don't overexpose yourself to one individual.
Yes.
And my comment is just that it may lead that we have overexposure to one person and from an investment point of view.
I think I've got it.
I think that when you are looking at this again, Advocate, as we've heard previously with other entities, the PIC tends to have looked at them individually, not cumulatively, in terms of exposure. When they've done that, we saw that with the discussions we had yesterday and previously. So when we're looking at this, we would look at all three, Daybreak, Home Loans, and Resorite, in relation to MMI. If I understand you correctly, that would be the total PIC exposure to that entity. Is that correct? Advocate?
Sorry.
I'm talking to the advocates. I'm talking to you, Mr. Libba.
I didn't realize, I apologize.
Sorry. I'm just saying that because you indicated that these two entities, SA Home Loans and Resorite, as with Daybreak, are under investigation.
Yes.
And therefore the point being made about may have led to an overexposure. We would be looking at the three as an exposure of PIC in the cumulative sense to those three.
Absolutely.
And the decisions, even if they're made separately, it's the cumulative exposure to one entity.
Exactly. And it is, as it's pointed out, it is an exposure to Kolofelo Maponya.
Do you have any idea what that cumulative exposure is at this point in time?
Not at this stage.
Thank you, Commissioner. Based on similar transactions during that period and offers received from competitors, because when I joined Daybreak as the CEO, I went around to see, but if there is an alternative, maybe to sell the company to recover some of our money. The market price for poultry business of the size of Daybreak farms trade at roughly 600 million to 800 million rand. And the fact that Daybreak farms never made sensible profits under AFGRI, it seems as if the 1.2 billion paid by PIC may have been an overvalued or overpayment. But unfortunately, I wasn't...
Sorry.
No, Commissioner? Yeah. Unfortunately, I wasn't part of the initial deal team, so I can't comment on what was the base for the valuation of the initial transaction.
But again, Advocate Libba, perhaps that is part of what that presentation that you're making will be, because obviously what the basis was, that's a huge one-third difference to the valuation. What
It is.
comprised that, and it would be part of what you present to us in due course.
We will do, Mr. Commissioner, and that's why I asked you to underline certain aspects. We know from the evidence of this witness, A, that PIC in a previous deal said you must sell off this entity because of the underperformance of this entity. We know from his evidence that at the time of the transaction, the debt exposure of this entity was roughly about 1.2 billion, just the debt. And the investment into that entity was mainly used to settle the debt of that entity.
And it's quite an issue when you spin out a company and you burden it with debt, and it does happen sometimes, and it's quite an issue, It's good.
Can you just explain to the Commission, I think I've missed that somewhere, at the meeting held I think it is F or G. No, E. At that meeting, I believe the CEO, Mr. Maponya, was fired.
No, I don't want to say he was fired, but he was asked to step aside.
Okay.
Sorry,
And I believe before that meeting, he had a meeting with the CEO, Dr. Dan Machilla, at the PIC.
I'm not aware of that
You're
meeting.
not aware of that. Do you know of a PwC report?
I heard about the report, but I didn't base because I was more on the operational side. I didn't use the PwC report as my guidance when I was the CEO at that stage.
I also place on record, Mr. Commissioner, that we have information that PwC provided a report to the CEO about the financial situation of the Daybreak Farms prior to this board meeting, and it is because of that PwC report that the CEO was asked to step aside. And the chairperson of that entity also resigned at the same time. Is that correct? Can you confirm that?
I can confirm that, yeah.
And it is as a result of that stepping aside and resignation of the chair that you were then asked to go to the Daybreak Farms as the acting CEO.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Sorry, I took you off a side.
Sorry, but when you were asked to go and take up that position, had PIC already committed to getting involved in that company?
You see, that was a reason for the appointment of the experts to assess the current situation, to propose a turnaround plan, which will then be utilized later on for what PIC should do with the deal.
Just the chronology, Mr. Commissioner, is the investment was in 2015 by the PIC, and very shortly thereafter this was the board meeting with two PIC non-executive directors sitting on the board, and the CEO, Mr. Maponya, then asked to step aside, being replaced by the person from the PIC, Mr. De Jonge, to act as the CEO of the company.
Thank you, Commissioner. The underperformance of Daybreak Farms to the point that they became technically insolvent was the unusual high feed prices experienced during 2015-2016 and the management decisions that led to the loss of critical institutional memory. See this attachment here to Annexure I for progress reports that I was sent through to PIC on findings and actions during my time at Daybreak.
I want you to deal in more detail with the loss of critical institutional memory. It's been put in very soft terms, if I might call it that. Can you just explain it more?
Yeah, what happened when Daybreak Farms was taken over from AFGRI, within 3 to 6 months, almost all the executives were all dismissed, or there was apparently change of business, and they were retrenched. But all of them went to the CCMA, and they were actually given severance packages to go. So at one moment there was no executives actually left in the company.
And what was the situation with the salaries of the new people appointed by Daybreak?
With the new people appointed, although they've had experience in similar businesses, but they didn't have experience in poultry businesses, the salaries were extremely higher than the normal salaries that was paid to the previous guys.
And what was the financial implication of that on the institution Daybreak Farms?
Well, when I came in, they made a loss of almost 200 million rand within a year period. As there was a delay in the approval of
Sorry. Before you go further, feed prices, they can have quite a big impact on these kind of businesses. What was the issue there? Because you said that they do control part of the value chain on the feed prices. Just explain further there and the impact.
Okay. Yeah. Now, Commissioner, the biggest part of the feed is maize and soya. And the soya price was normally within the 4,000 rand per ton. It went up to almost 8,000 rand per ton, so it was extremely high.
From where? From what price? Come again?
Roughly 4,500, it went up double at that period. So that had a big impact, we have to admit that. And the maize price is always normal, year around 2,000, it went almost up to 4,000 rand. So that had a big impact. So your raw material that you had to buy. And because of the cash flow problems that Daybreak had, they have to go and buy raw materials at cash. They didn't get facilities to buy on credit. And that makes it extremely difficult to manage the business at the time that I was with the company. Thank you, Commissioner. As there was a delay in the approval of the turnaround plan by the PIC, the agricultural specialist informed Daybreak Farms on 20 October of the intention to withdraw. Whereafter, I also requested to be moved back to my current position at the PIC at the end of November 2016. Since my return back from PIC, I haven't dealt with or interacted with Daybreak Farms from an investment or operational point.
Do you know whether the PIC had to recapitalize this entity, that they put in more money, in other words, into this entity?
During my period, they gave a guarantee to AFGRI or through Land Bank to AFGRI of 200 million rand to help, which helped us to take us through that interim period. But that's why the agricultural economists decided to withdraw, because they can't interact or make agreements because the company is technically insolvent, so you become personally liable. So that's why they withdrew. So, and it was very important that the debt should be capitalized to get the balance sheet in a healthy or solvent position again.
The other interesting aspect of this transaction, Mr. de Jonge, I believe there were transaction fees paid.
That's correct, Commissioner. Normally, PIC charge a 1% transaction fee for the expenses, due diligences. That's a normal practice. So in this case, there was 1% for PIC and 1% for MMI. That amount roughly to 13 million that was paid.
And if I understand that correctly, MMI, who came to the PIC in financial difficulties, got a transaction fee of 13 million rand.
That's correct, Commissioner.
We have information.
13? Is it 13 or 30?
1.3, Mr. Commissioner.
Is the transaction fee?
But we have information it was much more. It is still under investigation, and we will present evidence later on the score.
I'm assuming in your investigations you would explain why there was a transaction fee to Mr. Maponya at all? I mean, it was his business?
Yes, it was. We'll explain that. This is one of those stories, luckily, before this commission, Mr. de Jonge, which has a happy ending. I believe that this entity has now been turned around and is making a profit. It's in fact improving.
If I can just comment, Commissioner, when I left in November, the company started making small profits, and I understand now they're making good profits.
Yeah. Just to check a couple of things, there's a section on it on the turnaround plan.
Yes.
Here, I just wonder maybe whether you could make some pointers there as a first point. The second point is the 1.2 billion which was put in terms because it's debt. Is it being serviced at the moment? Do we know? Yeah, and whether too is that was the new management that came through during that turnaround time.
Can I just add to that? Is the question, the 200 million guarantee, is that no longer in place? Is it no longer needed, or is it still in place? That was from, if I remember correctly from what you said, that was from the Land Bank. And is the shareholding the same as at the initial?
Thank you, Commissioner. Just on the turnaround, I prefer that the specialists rather come and testify on their own turnaround plan. I'm not very technical on that side, so I prefer that they do that. On the 200 million guarantee, when I left, that guarantee was still in place. I'm not sure about that. And then the 1.2 billion, up to the stage when I left in November 2016, that wasn't serviced. And I'm not, also, as I'm not involved, I'm not sure if they're servicing at this stage. And then new management, they brought in Mr. What's his name? Sorebi. He's the acting CEO now, and he's doing good work at this stage.
The shareholding remains?
No, the shareholding changed because with the restructuring, that's my understanding, is the shares were taken back from AFPRO because of non-performance, and then the shares were split between the three clients of PIC, GPF, UIF, and CC.
Just to check, so
Sorry,
the land bank guarantee, what happened to it?
I'm not sure, but at that stage it was only given for 6 months to help us through that period. So I left before that actually expired. So I don't have information on what happened with that later on.
Okay.
But with the cash they're making now, I don't think that will be a problem. They're making good profits now.
But the question, I think that when you do present that whether this was ever needed to be utilized and whether it is now no longer in place. Did it simply function as a guarantee? Was it ever drawn down, and whether it is still in place?
No, what happened is the guarantee went through to AFCRI, and they made 200 million rand available, addition to the 1.2 billion for us, because at that stage the creditor was almost 200 million rand, and there was at the point that they wanted to liquidate the company, so we had to settle. Most of that money was utilized to settle the outstanding creditors, the normal operating creditors.
So the guarantee was in fact drawn to AFCRI,
That's
and
right.
who provided the cash to meet the
That's
creditors.
correct, yeah.
Therefore, the question becomes, has this been repaid, rather than has it been?
As I said, when I left, it wasn't settled yet, but I can't confirm at this stage.
So basically, the PIC runs the company because they are the major shareholders and they are the major debt holders also.
That's correct. According to my knowledge, also the PIC are the only directors also on the company, with Mr. Sorebi as the CEO. He's an independent person.
It will be quite interesting to find out if there are any other companies that are being run that way by the PIC. Do we know of any, Advocate Luke?
I can't commit myself to an answer now, Mr. Commissioner,
Yeah.
but we will present evidence on that score.
Okay. Then another question is, when you say the company is doing well now, is it double the size now? Is it half of what it was? Is it 1/3 of what it was?
Yeah, see, the main reason, and all the poultry companies are making good money now because of that. I don't know if I pronounce it right. Sterilose, that was there last year. The supply of chicken reduced a lot, so there's a big demand for chicken at this stage. So it's more the output didn't, so the production didn't grow, but the price grew. So they're getting more for the chicken at this stage.
That's the evidence, Mr.
Sorry,
Commissioner.
just 1 point, just so that I'm clear. We had, in terms of the funding, it was a 1.2 billion and then a 200 million, so the investment in this was 1.4 billion in total, being the 200 guarantee from the land bank as well as the 1.2 billion from the PIC. We have to look at the valuation and what was overpaid, because that was the debt. So in essence, what it seemed to me, and perhaps in your presentation you would then deal with that, is the price was determined by the level of debt rather than what the value of the company was?
It would seem like that, Mr.
Because it's
Commissioner.
too coincidental of 1.2 billion debt and 1.2 billion
Yes.
paid. So that the valuation was determined by what was owed rather than by what was the value of the
Absolutely.
company. And then there were, in addition, the payments of transaction fees of 13 million to an individual who was involved in the company. And obviously now we would also like the ownership structure, because that sounds now it's only the PIC that is, through the entities that it represents, that is owning this entity. And therefore, perhaps in your information, what is the level of profitability and the debt service agreements that are in place to ensure that there is return on that investment to the PIC?
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. That is, and we'll have to recall Mr. Rajar, who was not only the head of Unlisted at the time, but also must have intimate knowledge of this transaction as he sat on the board from the date after the investment into this entity.
I also think if recalling Mr. Raja, I'd like to put on the table for him to address the question of the movement of Mr. de Jong. Because I think that I would like to understand how that is simply implemented. We move you from A to B, no explanations, no nothing. Well, you're a male, so of a certain age. And males of a certain age must know they are vulnerable. Okay.
I'm
Well, they
also
may be
very
vulnerable.
sensitive to that.
I understand the sensitivity, and we won't go there.
On the board, there were land bank people. Were they there because of that guarantee, that 200?
Yeah, they also funded, you see, they made money available through AFGRI because there's the structure there. So the operating capital they've put in. So based on that agreement that they had
Oh, I see. Because of the AFGRI investments. Okay.
Mr. Commissioner,
I think in that circumstance, I think it would be helpful when you do present that we get all of these different pockets of funding, whether it's from the land bank to AFGRI, so that we know in the picture of Daybreak what actual funding was available through what entities and what that total was and the turnaround strategy. And it is most welcome that it is now making a profit, but those debts have to be serviced.
thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Just to check, those loans that AFGRI had, were they loans with the banks, and were they repaid in the end with the PIC money?
You see, sorry, Commissioner, is that the initial transaction you're talking? No,
Yes.
the money that went in was to repay the loans on Daybreak's balance sheet to AFGRI. So part of the transactions, they just took over in a way, loan accounts that they took over from AFGRI.
Okay, so the loans in Daybreak were shareholder loans from AFGRI? Is that
There was,
what you're saying?
there's other facilities also, as I don't, but there was other facilities on the balance sheet
On
that
the
they
balance
took
sheet.
over.
But the bulk was AFGRI?
AFGRI, yes.
And then money was raised from the PIC, and those loans were repaid?
That's
to
correct.
AFGRI
Yeah,
and-
they
and
effectively
others,
took the loans over from AFGRI.
Yeah.
That was part of the transaction.
Yes, and the purchase price now, the loans
right.
and the purchase price.
That's right.
Basically, okay. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. That's the business for Wednesday.
Yes, thank you. Your way forward?
We will then reconvene, Mr. Commissioner, Monday at 10.
Any indication?
Sorry. Well, the question for me would be, when do we continue with the Daybreak presentation? Is that going to be Monday, or are you not ready for that yet?
It cannot be, Mr. Commissioner. I would like to finalize the investigation that we're busy with before we come back on Daybreak. But it was essential for me to present this evidence so that the matters that must be addressed can come into the open, and those that can shed more light on these matters can then be prepared to come to the Commission.
Mr. de Jonge, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and thanks for agreeing to come and testify before us.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I don't know if you'll be called back, but for now you are excused.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. And we will adjourn until Monday. What's the date on Monday?
It's the 18th of
18th
March.
of March at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Die voor my werk.